My name is Aliza Morrison, 32 years old, and the youngest senior financial auditor at Horizon Tech. I built my career on integrity and meticulous attention to detail. 8 years of spotless audits made me the obvious choice to lead our merger verification process with industry giant Vertex Corp. I never expected that my dedication would make me a target, or that walking into that sleek boardroom would change everything. When the chairman's wife leaned across the table and purred those words, I knew something was terribly wrong. Before I tell you how one line in a contract saved my career and exposed a multi-million-dollar fraud, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button if you enjoy stories about corporate justice served cold. My journey at Horizon Tech began 8 years ago, when I was fresh out of business school with a finance degree and student loans that kept me up at night. I started in accounts receivable, meticulously reconciling payments and catching discrepancies that others missed. It wasn't glamorous work, but I approached each spreadsheet as if the company's future depended on it. Patricia Winters, our then director of finance, noticed my work ethic during a routine department review. She was in her early 60s with silver hair always styled in a perfect bob, designer reading glasses perched on her nose, and a reputation for being brilliantly demanding. "You have an eye for patterns most people miss," she told me after calling me into her office unexpectedly. "And you're not afraid to flag inconsistencies, even when they come from senior managers." She studied me over the rim of her glasses. That's rare and valuable. Under Patricia's mentorship, I climbed through the ranks faster than anyone expected. By 28, I was leading audit teams and providing financial insights that helped shape company strategy. By 30, I was the youngest senior auditor in company history. Along the way, I formed tight bonds with Rachel Goldman in legal and Kevin Park in IT. Rachel was a fiercely intelligent attorney with a dry sense of humor who helped me understand the legal implications of financial decisions. Kevin was our data security expert who could extract and analyze information from our systems that seemed impossible to find. The three of us often worked late, ordering takeout and helping each other through complex problems. When CEO Alexander Fletcher announced the potential merger with Vertex Corporation, excitement rippled through the company. Vertex was 5 times our size and dominated the enterprise software market that we'd been trying to break into for years. "This merger represents the culmination of everything we've built," Alexander told us during the all-hands meeting. Tall and distinguished with salt and pepper hair, he commanded respect without intimidation. Our innovation combined with their market reach could transform the industry. I remember the pride I felt hearing him speak. In the 8 years I'd worked at Horizon, Alexander had built a culture of innovation and integrity. He wasn't perfect, but he listened to employees at all levels and valued substance over showmanship. After the announcement, he called me into his office. "Aliza, I need someone I can trust completely to lead the financial verification process for this merger," he said, his expression serious. "Someone who won't be swayed by pressure or politics." My heart raced. This was the biggest opportunity of my career. The pre-merger audit would require reviewing every aspect of our financials to ensure complete transparency with Vertex. It would mean long hours and intense scrutiny, but also visibility with the executive team and the chance to shape the future of the combined company. "I won't let you down," I promised. That evening, I met Rachel and Kevin at our favorite bar to celebrate. To Aliza, Rachel raised her glass, her dark curls bouncing with the movement. "The woman who's about to make sure this merger doesn't screw us all over." "I'll drink to that," Kevin grinned, clinking his beer against our glasses. "Just promise you'll still remember us little people when you're running the merged finance department." I laughed and shook my head. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. This is going to be the most intense 3 months of my career. I had no idea how prophetic those words would be, or that within weeks, I'd be fighting not just for my career, but for everything I'd built. The following Monday, I assembled a team of 5 auditors and mapped out our approach. We'd start with the last 3 years of financial statements, then dig deeper into revenue recognition, expense allocation, and asset valuation. Every discrepancy would be documented, every question answered. "Transparency is non-negotiable," I told my team. We need to know our financials better than we know our own names before we sit down with Vertex. For 2 weeks, we worked 14-hour days. I created a secure digital workspace where we tracked findings and questions, color-coding items by priority and status. Each night before going to bed, I reviewed our progress and planned the next day's focus areas. The initial results were encouraging. Our financial position was strong, with consistent revenue growth and healthy profit margins. There were minor discrepancies in expense categorization, but nothing that raised serious concerns. Then, Alexander scheduled the first major meeting with Vertex executives, 2 weeks earlier than planned. They're eager to move forward, he explained when I expressed concern about the timeline. Just present what you have so far. Show them we're organized and thorough. That night, I prepared my presentation meticulously, practicing in front of my bathroom mirror until I felt confident in every slide. I chose a navy blue suit that projected professionalism without being intimidating and laid out my lucky earrings, small silver stars that Patricia had given me after my first successful audit. You're ready for this, I told my reflection, trying to ignore the flutter of anxiety in my stomach. This is what you've worked for. I had no way of knowing that the meeting would set in motion events that would threaten everything I'd built, or that beneath Horizon's seemingly solid financial foundation, dangerous cracks were forming. The Vertex headquarters occupied 30 floors of a gleaming downtown skyscraper. I arrived 30 minutes early, passing through multiple security checkpoints before being escorted to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. I arranged my materials at the table, checked the presentation one final time, and waited as the room gradually filled with executives from both companies. Alexander arrived with Jeremy Wilson, our chief financial officer, a man in his late 40s with a permanently harried expression who joined the company just 18 months earlier. Richard Hammond, the CEO of Vertex, entered flanked by his legal team. He was shorter than I expected, with the compact build of a former athlete and the practiced smile of someone used to getting his way. What surprised me was the woman at his side, dressed in an expensive red suit that stood out among the navy and charcoal gray uniforms of corporate America. This is my wife, Belinda, Richard announced casually, as if bringing spouses to high-level merger discussions was completely normal. She has a background in corporate finance and likes to keep an eye on our investments. Belinda Hammond scanned the room with calculating eyes, her gaze lingering on me a beat longer than comfort allowed. She took a seat directly across from me, while a stern-looking man in an impeccable suit sat beside her. Gregory Wells, Vertex legal counsel. He introduced himself without a smile, laying out a leather portfolio and gold pen with methodical precision. Alexander looked momentarily confused by Belinda's presence but recovered quickly. Shall we begin? Aliza will present our financial overview and audit progress. I stood and began my presentation, highlighting our financial position and the thoroughness of our verification process. 3 minutes in, Belinda interrupted. You're spending an awful lot of time on procedure, she said, examining her manicured nails. We're more interested in the actual numbers. I maintained my composure and moved to the financial slides, detailing our revenue streams and growth trajectory. When I reached the slide about our recent expansion into international markets, I noticed Richard and Jeremy exchange glances. The Singapore office has exceeded projections by 27%, I explained, though we're still finalizing some expense allocations for the first quarter. Those little details can wait, Richard waved dismissively. The big picture is what matters for now. I continued, but the interruptions became more frequent. When I mentioned our new contract with Westfield Industries, Jeremy jumped in. Aliza is being characteristically thorough, he said with a tight smile, but we can streamline this discussion. The Westfield numbers aren't finalized yet. I frowned. The Westfield contract had been signed and implemented 3 months ago. The numbers were definitely final. By the time we broke for lunch, my unease had grown into genuine concern. Something felt off about the entire interaction. The caterers brought in an elaborate spread, and I found myself alone at the buffet table with Belinda. First big merger, sweetie? She asked, selecting a shrimp from the display. I've worked on acquisitions before, But yes, this is the largest, I replied, keeping my tone professional. She leaned closer, her perfume expensively overwhelming. Relax, princess. You're working too hard on this. The deal is practically done. She patted my arm condescendingly. These audits are just formalities. No one actually expects perfection. I stepped back, maintaining my composure. At Horizon, we value transparency and accuracy. It's not about perfection, it's about integrity. Belinda's smile didn't reach her eyes. How adorable. Just between us girls, you might want to focus on your next career move. Corporate restructuring, after mergers, can be so unpredictable. As she walked away, a chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the office temperature. After the meeting, I immediately called Rachel from my car. Something's wrong, I said without preamble. Jeremy contradicted me about finalized contracts, Richard dismissed important details, and his wife was there making vaguely threatening comments. His wife was at the merger meeting? Rachel sounded as surprised as I had been. That's unusual. What exactly did she say? I recounted the relax, princess conversation. That's inappropriate on multiple levels, Rachel said. And Jeremy contradicting you about Westfield is concerning. Those numbers were finalized weeks ago. I reviewed the contract myself. Exactly. And there were these weird looks between Richard and Jeremy when I mentioned Singapore. The Singapore expansion was Jeremy's pet project, Rachel mused. He pushed hard for it last year, even when the projections were questionable. I need to look deeper into those accounts, I decided. Can you pull all the legal documentation on Singapore and Westfield? Already on it, Rachel assured me. And Aliza, be careful. If something shady is happening, they won't appreciate you shining a light on it. That warning would prove more prescient than either of us realized. The next morning, I redirected my audit team to focus on international operations and recent major contracts. I didn't share my suspicions, only that we needed to ensure absolute accuracy in these high-value areas. Over the next few days, I noticed subtle changes in the office atmosphere. Jeremy, normally too busy to micromanage, suddenly wanted daily updates on our findings. Alexander seemed distracted during our check-ins, his usual attentiveness replaced by cursory nods and quick exits. When I requested access to the Singapore office's original expense reports, the administrative delays were immediate and suspicious. It took Kevin's technical assistance to finally access the complete records through our backup systems. What I found sent a cold wave of dread through me. The Singapore office's performance had been systematically inflated through creative expense allocations and premature revenue recognition. Similar patterns appeared in the Westfield contract, where future revenue phases had been recorded as current income. The discrepancies weren't immediately obvious unless you knew exactly what to look for, but once spotted, they formed a disturbing pattern that stretched back at least 18 months, coinciding with Jeremy's tenure as CFO. I needed more evidence before taking such serious concerns to Alexander. Working late into the night, I created a separate encrypted document tracking every questionable transaction, every misaligned date, every irregular approval. The picture emerging wasn't just concerning, it was potentially criminal. With my initial findings documented, I knew I needed to dig deeper. The patterns I'd discovered weren't isolated incidents, but rather suggested systematic manipulation of financial records. If confirmed, this would not only derail the merger, but could result in serious legal consequences for those involved. I expanded my investigation to include all financial records from the past 3 years, focusing particularly on the period since Jeremy joined as CFO. Each day, I arrived at the office before 7, and often didn't leave until after midnight. My apartment became a place I merely visited to shower and change clothes. The breakthrough came when I discovered a series of offshore accounts linked to Horizon through a labyrinth of shell companies. These accounts showed regular transfers that correlated with our major contract signings, including Westfield and the Singapore expansion. The transactions all had Jeremy's digital signature, but lacked the secondary approval normally required for transfers of that magnitude. In several instances, the documentation supporting these transfers was incomplete or suspiciously vague. One Tuesday evening, as I was cross-referencing these transactions with our contract database, Kevin stopped by my office. His usual easygoing demeanor was replaced by evident concern. "You look like you haven't slept in days," he said, leaning against my doorframe. "I'm fine," I insisted, minimizing my screen as casually as possible. Kevin wasn't fooled. "Aliza, I've known you for 6 years. You only get that focused look when you found something serious." After ensuring the door was closed, I confided in him about the patterns I'd discovered. "I need to be absolutely certain before I take this to Alexander," I explained. "The implications are enormous." Kevin whistled low. "That would explain the unusual server access patterns I've been monitoring. Someone's been accessing historical financial records and making subtle changes." My pulse quickened. "Can you track who?" "The access used Jeremy's credentials, but the timing is strange. Some logins occurred while he was presenting at the Chicago conference last month. So someone else is using his login," I concluded. "Can you recover the original data?" Kevin nodded. "Our backup system creates timestamps that can't be altered. It would take time, but I could reconstruct the original records." "Please, Kevin, this is crucial." He agreed to help, but warned me to be careful. "If what you're suggesting is true, there's a lot at stake. People might do whatever it takes to protect themselves." His words proved prophetic the very next day when Jeremy cornered me in the break room. "You've been requesting unusual access to financial records," he said without preamble, his tone deceptively casual as he poured coffee. "Just being thorough for the audit," I replied, maintaining an even tone despite my racing heart. "There's thorough, and then there's excessive." Jeremy set down his cup, his expression hardening. "The Singapore and Westfield deals are settled. Stop digging into them. As lead auditor for the merger verification, I need to ensure all our financials are accurate," I countered. "That's my job, Jeremy." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Your job is to facilitate this merger, not create obstacles. Alexander is counting on a smooth process." "Alexander expects complete transparency," I corrected him, "and so does our board." Jeremy's fake smile vanished entirely. "Take some friendly advice, Aliza. Focus on the current quarter and leave the past alone. Some rocks shouldn't be turned over." After he left, I noticed my hands were shaking. I texted Rachel immediately. "Need to talk." "Not at the office." We met that evening at a quiet restaurant 10 blocks from Horizon. "Jeremy basically threatened me today," I told her after the waiter left with our orders. Rachel's expression darkened as I recounted the conversation. "That's serious, Aliza. Have you spoken with Alexander?" "Not yet. I need more concrete evidence first." "Be careful how you approach this," Rachel advised. "If Jeremy is manipulating financials, he won't be the only one involved. These schemes never operate in isolation." 2 days later, I requested a private dinner meeting with Alexander, choosing a restaurant we'd used for client meetings, professional but discreet. "I appreciate you making time," I began after we'd ordered. "There are some concerns about the audit that I wanted to discuss privately." Alexander looked tired, the usual spark in his eyes dimmed by what I assumed was merger stress. "Is there a problem with the timeline?" "Not the timeline, but the content." I chose my words carefully. "I've found some irregularities in our financial reporting, particularly around international operations and major contracts." I outlined my concerns without directly accusing anyone, explaining the patterns of misallocated expenses and premature revenue recognition. Alexander listened intently, his expression increasingly troubled. When I finished, he was silent for several moments. "These are serious concerns," he finally said, "but raising them now could jeopardize everything we've worked for. The merger is in a delicate stage. If these irregularities are real, proceeding with the merger could be considered fraud," I pointed out. "Vertex has a right to know our true financial position." Alexander rubbed his forehead. Continue your investigation, but discreetly. Don't discuss this with anyone else, not even your audit team. Report only to me. His reaction wasn't what I'd hoped for, but at least he hadn't dismissed my concerns outright. I agreed to continue quietly, though unease lingered. The next morning, I arrived at work to find an anonymous email in my inbox sent through an encryption service that masked the sender. Stop the investigation immediately, it read. You're creating problems where none exist. Consider your future carefully. I forwarded the email to my personal account and deleted it from the company's server, my resolve only strengthening. Someone was scared enough to threaten me, which meant I was on the right track. That afternoon, Patricia unexpectedly announced her retirement, effective immediately. When I visited her office, I found her unusually subdued as she packed her personal items. I thought you were staying through the merger, I said, helping her wrap a framed photo of her family. Plans change, she replied vaguely. The board feels the transition will be smoother, with less old guard involvement. Something in her tone alarmed me. Patricia, did someone pressure you to leave? She hesitated, then spoke quietly. Aliza, you're brilliant and principled, but sometimes standing on principle can be costly. Be careful who you trust in the coming weeks. Before I could press further, Jeremy appeared in the doorway. Patricia, the car service is here. He nodded curtly to me. Aliza, I believe your team is waiting for the 3 o'clock update. As Patricia hugged me goodbye, she whispered, Trust your instincts. They've always been your strength. With my mentor gone, I felt increasingly isolated. The stakes had become painfully clear. This wasn't just about financial irregularities anymore. Someone was systematically removing obstacles, and I feared I was next on the list. That night, working alone in my office, I discovered the most damning evidence yet. A series of doctored invoices from vendors that didn't actually exist. The fake expenses were being used to funnel money out of Horizon while artificially inflating our operational costs to reduce taxable income. As I documented this new finding, a notification popped up on my screen. Someone had just accessed my secure audit folder using administrator credentials. I immediately called Kevin. Someone's in my audit files right now, I told him urgently. Get out of the system, he instructed. I'll lock down access and track the intrusion. By morning, Kevin confirmed my fears. They copied everything and tried to delete the originals, but I'd already backed up your work to a secure server. Who was it? The login traces back to the executive suite, but it was bounced through several internal servers to obscure the exact origin, Kevin explained. Whoever did this knows our system architecture extremely well. The implications were chilling. The circle of people who would have both the technical knowledge and the administrative access to perform such maneuvers was extremely small. Someone at the highest levels of Horizon was actively working against my investigation. I needed to accelerate my timeline. With Kevin's help, I began compiling a comprehensive dossier of all the evidence we'd gathered. If someone was trying to silence me, I needed to ensure the truth would survive even if my career didn't. The morning after discovering the intrusion into my files, I arrived at work early to find my office door ajar. Even before stepping inside, I knew something was wrong. My desk had been ransacked, drawers pulled out, and contents dumped onto the floor. My computer was still there but powered off, unusual since I always left it in sleep mode. Papers were scattered everywhere, and the potted peace lily that Rachel had given me lay broken beside the window, soil spilling across the carpet. I stood frozen in the doorway, my heart pounding. This wasn't a random act of vandalism. Someone had searched my office, deliberately and thoroughly. Stepping carefully around the mess, I checked my hidden backup drive, concealed behind the loose baseboard under my desk. It was gone. Fortunately, the most critical files were stored on Kevin's secure server, but the invasion left me shaken. I called security, who arrived with cameras to document the damage. They promised a full investigation, but their placating tone suggested they'd already decided this was a routine break-in rather than targeted intimidation. As news of the incident spread through the office, I noticed a subtle but unmistakable change in how colleagues interacted with me. People who normally stopped to chat hurried past with brief nods. Conversations in the break room faltered when I entered. My audit team remained professional, but seemed hesitant to be seen with me outside of scheduled meetings. "They're afraid," Rachel observed during our lunch offsite that day. "Word has spread that you're asking difficult questions about the merger. No one wants to be collateral damage if you're targeted." "I can't blame them," I admitted. "But this isolation makes everything harder." "Have you considered taking this to the board?" Rachel asked. "Not without ironclad proof. Several board members have close relationships with Jeremy, and Alexander seems increasingly reluctant to rock the boat." Rachel pushed her salad around thoughtfully. "What about taking a leave of absence until this blows over? I'm worried about your safety." "If I leave now, they win," I said firmly. "Besides, the merger vote is in 2 weeks. If I don't finish this investigation before then, it might be too late." That afternoon, I discovered another disturbing development. While reviewing financial projections for the coming quarter, I found significant discrepancies between the numbers in the system and those in my backup files. Someone had altered the data to make our financial position appear stronger than it actually was. With Kevin's help, I determined that the changes had been made over the past week, using credentials that traced back to the finance department's general administrative account. The alterations were subtle but comprehensive, designed to withstand casual scrutiny while significantly inflating our value to Vertex. "Can you recover the original data?" I asked Kevin as we huddled in his office, speaking in hushed tones. He nodded grimly. "I've been running nightly backups since you first raised concerns. I can reconstruct what the numbers should be, but it will take time." "How much time?" "At least 3 days of continuous processing." This was a sophisticated job, changing thousands of data points by small amounts that add up to major differences. "Start immediately," I urged. "We're running out of time." As Kevin began the painstaking process of data recovery, I continued my own investigation, now focused on connecting the dots between Jeremy and Richard Hammond. If they were collaborating to manipulate the merger, there had to be evidence of their relationship beyond the current negotiations. Through careful research of business news archives and social media, I discovered that Jeremy and Richard had both worked at Gartner Financial in the early 2000s, though their employment didn't overlap. More significantly, Jeremy had served on the board of a small tech startup that was acquired by one of Vertex's subsidiaries 3 years ago, shortly before he joined Horizon. The connection wasn't definitive proof of collusion, but it established a plausible link that might explain their apparent cooperation now. I was documenting these findings when an urgent message came from Kevin. "Found something big. Come to server room as soon as possible." The server room was in the basement, accessible only with specialized security clearance. Kevin met me at the door, his expression a mix of excitement and apprehension. "I've been running pattern recognition on the deleted financial data," he explained as he led me to his workstation. "Look at this." On his screen was a complex visualization showing transaction patterns over the past 18 months. Highlighted in red were dozens of points where money had moved between accounts in ways that defied normal business operations. "These red clusters represent what I call round-trip transactions," Kevin explained. "Money leaves Horizon through vendor payments, passes through several entities, and then returns as investment income from offshore accounts." "Money laundering," I breathed. "Essentially, yes. But here's the really interesting part." He pulled up another screen showing email metadata. Every time one of these transaction cycles completed, there was encrypted communication between Jeremy's private email and an account registered to a shell company called Pinnacle Ventures. "Can you decrypt the emails?" Kevin shook his head. "Not without resources I don't have access to, but the timing and frequency establish a clear pattern of coordination." "And Pinnacle Ventures? Can we trace that?" "That's the bombshell. Pinnacle is owned by a holding company called Hammond Family Investments. The pieces were falling into place. Jeremy wasn't just cooking the books to inflate Horizon's value, he was actively siphoning money while preparing for the merger. And Richard Hammond was almost certainly involved. But why? If Vertex was acquiring Horizon, wouldn't Richard want our company to be financially sound? The answer came the next day through Rachel, who had been quietly investigating Belinda Hammond's background. Belinda isn't just Richard's wife, Rachel explained when we met in a coffee shop 3 blocks from the office. Before marrying Richard, she was Belinda Lawson, whose family owns Lawson Technologies. Our main competitor, I realized. The implications immediately clear. Exactly. Lawson has been trying to access our client base for years. If Vertex acquires us and then deliberately mismanages the integration, our clients would jump ship to the next most established provider in the market, I finished. Lawson. It's a corporate raid disguised as a merger, Rachel confirmed. They're not buying us to strengthen Vertex, they're buying us to dismantle us and redirect our business to Lawson. The revelation was both shocking and clarifying. Everything now made sense. Jeremy's financial manipulations, Richard's dismissive attitude toward due diligence, Belinda's inappropriate presence at meetings, and the escalating efforts to silence my investigation. I spent that night documenting everything we'd discovered, creating a comprehensive timeline of events supported by financial records, email metadata, and corporate connection research. By morning, I had compiled a dossier that painted a damning picture of conspiracy and fraud. I was preparing to present my findings to Alexander when my desk phone rang. It was Carol from Human Resources. Her voice professionally neutral. Aliza, could you come to my office at 11 today? There's a matter we need to discuss. My stomach dropped. May I ask what this is regarding? It's better discussed in person, she replied, which told me everything I needed to know. I called Rachel immediately. HR wants to see me at 11. This is it. Don't go alone, she advised. I'll meet you there. The HR conference room was deliberately intimidating, with its long table and uncomfortable chairs. Carol sat with Jeremy and a man I recognized as Vertex's HR director. Thank you for coming, Aliza. Carol began with practiced sympathy. In preparation for the merger, we're reviewing organizational structure to identify redundancies. And you've identified me as redundant, I stated flatly. Jeremy had the decency to look uncomfortable. Your position overlaps significantly with Vertex's existing audit structure. In the interest of efficiency, we've determined that your role won't continue after the merger. Interesting timing, I remarked, right after I uncover financial irregularities that could derail the merger. The Vertex HR director leaned forward. Miss Morrison, these kinds of accusations are serious and potentially defamatory. I suggest you focus on a professional transition rather than making unfounded allegations. Rachel, who had been silent until now, spoke up. As legal counsel, I advise that this meeting be adjourned until Aliza has had time to consult with representation regarding her termination. This isn't a termination, Carol quickly corrected. It's a restructuring notification. Aliza will remain employed until the merger closes, at which point she'll receive a standard severance package. In other words, they were sidelining me without officially firing me, keeping me technically employed but removed from any meaningful role until the merger rendered me officially redundant. As we left the meeting, I felt a strange calm descend. They had played their hand, which meant it was time to play mine. We need to move quickly, I told Rachel once we were alone. The final merger approval meeting is in 3 days. We need to compile everything we have into an irrefutable case. What about Alexander? Shouldn't we try once more to bring him on board? I shook my head. He's made his choice. He's either complicit or willfully blind, but either way, he's not going to help us. For the next 48 hours, Rachel, Kevin, and I worked around the clock, assembling our evidence into a comprehensive report. Kevin recovered the original financial data, proving systematic manipulation. Rachel documented the legal violations implied by the altered records. I provided the narrative context, connecting the financial fraud to the planned corporate sabotage. The night before the final merger meeting, I barely slept, running through scenarios in my mind. The stakes couldn't be higher, not just for me personally, but for hundreds of Horizon employees whose livelihoods would be destroyed if the predatory merger proceeded. By morning, I had made my decision. I would attend the meeting not as a victim awaiting execution, but as the professional I had always been, armed with truth and ready to fight for what was right. The morning of the final merger meeting dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. I dressed with particular care, choosing a charcoal gray suit that projected authority and confidence. Around my neck, I placed the small silver star pendant that Patricia had given me, a reminder of her parting words, "Trust your instincts." My apartment felt foreign, as if it belonged to someone else, someone whose life hadn't been upended by corporate intrigue and betrayal. I hadn't slept more than 2 hours, but adrenaline kept me sharp, focused on the confrontation to come. Rachel called as I was gathering my things. "Are you sure about this? Once we take this step, there's no going back." "I'm sure," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "What's the worst that could happen? They've already decided to fire me." "The worst is considerably worse than that," Rachel warned. "People who commit fraud at this level don't appreciate being exposed. This could follow you for years. If I walk away, I'll be betraying everything I believe in," I said. I couldn't live with that. We agreed to meet at the coffee shop across from Horizon's headquarters. Kevin was already there when I arrived, his usual laid-back demeanor replaced by tense alertness. "The secure server with all our evidence is isolated and backed up to 3 separate locations," he assured me. "Even if they somehow access one, the others are safe." Rachel arrived moments later, carrying a leather portfolio containing printed copies of key documents. "I've notified a contact at the Securities and Exchange Commission," she said quietly. "They won't act immediately, but they're aware that evidence of potential securities fraud may be forthcoming." The 3 of us reviewed our plan one final time. I would attend the meeting as expected. If the situation unfolded as we anticipated, I would pass the complete audit file to Rachel, who would handle the legal implications. Kevin would remain on standby, ready to provide technical verification of data tampering if needed. "Whatever happens in there," I told my friends, "I want you both to know how grateful I am. You've risked your careers for this." "We've risked our careers for integrity," Rachel corrected me. "That's a hill worth dying on." At exactly 9:30, I walked into Horizon's headquarters for what might be the last time. The security guard greeted me normally, unaware that I now existed in corporate limbo, neither fully employed nor officially terminated. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt interminable, each floor chime marking one step closer to confrontation. The boardroom was already full when I arrived. Alexander sat at the head of the table, with Jeremy and other Horizon executives to his right. Richard Hammond occupied the opposite end, flanked by his legal team, with Belinda beside him, resplendent in emerald green, like royalty overseeing the annexation of a conquered territory. Rachel slipped in behind me, taking a seat against the wall with other support staff, her expression professionally neutral despite the tension thrumming between us. "Ah, Aliza." Alexander's greeting was polite but distant. "We weren't sure you'd be joining us today." "I wouldn't miss it," I replied evenly, taking the only available seat, directly across from Belinda. Her perfectly lined lips curved into a predatory smile, dedication to the bitter end, admirable, if ultimately futile. I maintained eye contact without responding, refusing to be baited into unprofessional behavior. Richard cleared his throat impatiently. "Let's proceed. We've all reviewed the final merger terms. Unless there are substantive questions, I suggest we move to signing." Alexander nodded, his once familiar face, now a mask of corporate ambition. "Vertex has been very accommodating in addressing our concerns. I believe this agreement represents the best interests of both companies and our shareholders." Gregory, Vertex's counsel, distributed signature packets around the table. When he reached me, he hesitated. "Miss Morrison, as you'll be transitioning out after the merger, your signature isn't required." "I'm still Horizon's senior auditor," I replied calmly. "Until the merger officially closes, I have both the right and the responsibility to review all financial documentation." A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face, but he placed a packet before me nonetheless. As the executives began signing their copies, Belinda leaned across the table, her voice pitched for my ears alone. "Relax, princess. You're about to be fired. All this righteous indignation won't change that." In that moment, everything crystallized. The weeks of investigation, the mounting evidence, the personal attacks and professional isolation all led to this decision point. I could sign the documents, accept my severance, and walk away, or I could stand for the truth, regardless of personal cost. I met Belinda's gaze steadily and reached into my briefcase, withdrawing the comprehensive audit file we had prepared. Without breaking eye contact, I slid it across the table to Rachel. "For the record," I said, my voice clear in the suddenly silent room, "I cannot in good conscience endorse this merger under the current terms. The financial representations made by Horizon leadership contain material misstatements that Vertex should be aware of before proceeding." Jeremy's face drained of color. "Aliza, this is neither the time nor place for unfounded accusations." "They're not unfounded," I replied. "They're documented in detail in that file, which is now in legal custody." Alexander stood abruptly. "I think we need to take a brief recess. Aliza, a word in private?" "Anything you have to say can be said here," I responded, remaining seated. "Transparency is supposed to be a Horizon value, isn't it?" Richard Hammond's expression had darkened from irritation to genuine concern. "What exactly are you implying, Miss Morrison?" "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating explicitly that there are significant financial irregularities in Horizon's reported results that materially affect the valuation underlying this merger agreement." The room erupted in tense crosstalk. I stood, gathering my belongings. "The evidence has been preserved in multiple secure locations," I announced over the noise. "I suggest everyone review the audit findings carefully before proceeding." With that, I walked out of the boardroom, my heart pounding but my steps steady. I had done what I came to do. Whether it would make any difference remained to be seen. In the elevator down to the lobby, the enormity of what I'd just done hit me. I had effectively ended my career at Horizon and possibly in corporate finance altogether. No company would want an auditor with a reputation for blowing whistles, regardless of how justified the action might be. Outside, the bright sunshine seemed incongruous with the professional apocalypse I had just initiated. I walked aimlessly for several blocks, eventually finding myself in a small park where I collapsed onto a bench, emotional and physical exhaustion finally catching up with me. My phone buzzed with texts from Rachel. "Emergency meeting called. Hammond lawyers reviewing file. Stay available but off premises." Hours passed in a strange limbo. I returned to my apartment, changed into comfortable clothes, and waited for news. Kevin reported that IT had been instructed to lock down all financial systems, standard procedure when fraud allegations emerge. As evening approached, Rachel finally called. "It's happening," she said without preamble. "Hammond's legal team spent all afternoon reviewing our evidence. They've called an emergency session for tomorrow morning. Be ready." "Ready for what?" "I'm not entirely sure," Rachel admitted, "but it won't be a standard merger signing, that's for certain." That night, I oscillated between panic and strange calm. I had acted according to my principles, exposing wrongdoing despite personal risk. Whatever came next, I could face it knowing I had done the right thing. Morning came after a fitful night of half sleep. My phone rang at 6:30 a.m. "Aliza, it's Alexander. I need you in my office at 8 sharp. His tone gave nothing away, but the early hour and direct summons suggested significant developments. "I'll be there," I promised, already moving to prepare. Whatever the day might bring, the die was cast. I had trusted my instincts and stood my ground. Now I would face the consequences, whatever they might be. The Horizon headquarters seemed eerily quiet when I arrived at 7:45. The security guard checked my badge twice before letting me through, his usual friendly greeting replaced by tense professionalism. In the elevator, a junior account manager who normally chatted enthusiastically stood silently, eyes fixed on the floor numbers. Alexander's executive assistant wasn't at her desk when I reached the top floor. Instead, a security officer I didn't recognize nodded curtly and opened the door to Alexander's office without announcement. I steeled myself and walked in, expecting to find Alexander alone. Instead, the large office was filled with people. Alexander behind his desk, Richard and Belinda Hammond to one side, Gregory and another Vertex lawyer I didn't recognize seated on the leather sofa, and Jeremy standing uncomfortably by the window. Rachel was already there, her expression giving nothing away. "Aliza, thank you for coming," Alexander said formally. "Please, sit down." I took the single empty chair, positioned so everyone else was facing me. The setup felt deliberately intimidating, like a tribunal rather than a meeting. "Your allegations yesterday were extremely serious," Alexander continued. "As a result, both companies have agreed to a 24-hour pause in merger proceedings to investigate." Richard Hammond leaned forward. "Miss Morrison, I want to be very clear. If your claims prove to be without foundation, Vertex will pursue all available legal remedies for the damage done to this transaction and our reputation." "I understand," I replied evenly. "I stand by every documented finding in the audit file." Alexander nodded to Rachel, who opened a leather portfolio. After reviewing Miss Morrison's evidence, I initiated an independent verification process using Horizon's backup servers. The results are concerning, to say the least. She distributed documents to everyone present. This summary outlines systematic financial misrepresentations dating back approximately 18 months. The pattern suggests deliberate inflation of revenue, concealment of expenses, and artificial enhancement of growth metrics, particularly in international operations. Jeremy shifted uncomfortably. "These are complex accounting matters that can be interpreted in multiple ways. Nothing here definitively proves wrongdoing." "Actually," Rachel countered, "when viewed alongside the communication records and transaction patterns, the evidence is quite definitive." She turned to the second page of the document. "Particularly concerning is this series of transactions between Horizon subsidiaries and offshore entities linked to personal accounts." Belinda Hammond broke her silence. "This is absurd. You're manufacturing controversy to disrupt a beneficial merger because you're afraid of losing your position." "Mrs. Hammond," Rachel replied coolly, "your personal connection to Lawson Technologies, Horizon's primary competitor, creates its own interesting context for this discussion." Richard's head snapped toward his wife, surprise briefly displacing his controlled expression. Alexander cleared his throat. "In light of these findings, I've asked Horizon's outside counsel to review our legal position. They'll be joining us shortly." As if on cue, the door opened, and a woman I recognized as Sandra Peters from Blackwell Legal entered. She nodded to the room and took position beside Alexander. "After reviewing the documentation provided, we believe there is sufficient evidence to warrant a full forensic audit," Sandra announced. More immediately relevant to today's discussion, however, is Section 27.3 of the merger agreement. Gregory, Vertex's counsel, immediately flipped to that section in his copy. Sandra continued. "This section specifically addresses material misrepresentation of financial position. In short, if either party has knowingly presented inaccurate financial information that impacts valuation by more than 5%, the other party may withdraw without penalty and may seek damages equal to 3 times the amount misrepresented." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Based on the evidence we'd compiled, the misrepresentations exceeded the 5% threshold several times over. If Vertex withdrew citing this clause, Horizon would not only lose the merger but could face crippling financial penalties. Gregory scanned the relevant text, his expression growing increasingly serious. He leaned over to whisper something to Richard, then passed the document to him, pointing to a specific paragraph. Richard read it slowly, his face darkening. When he looked up, his gaze went straight to Jeremy, not Alexander. "Is this accurate?" Richard demanded. "Did you knowingly alter financial records to inflate Horizon's valuation?" Jeremy's facade finally cracked. The adjustments were within industry norms for presenting company performance in its best light. Every company does it. "That's not an answer," Richard pressed. "Did you deliberately misrepresent Horizon's financial position during merger negotiations?" Jeremy glanced desperately at Alexander, who remained stone-faced, then at Belinda, who suddenly seemed intensely interested in her manicured nails. I was advised that certain optimizations would facilitate the merger process, Jeremy finally admitted. The understanding was that post-merger reconciliation would address any discrepancies. Advised by whom? Sandra asked sharply. Jeremy's silence was damning. Richard turned to his wife. Belinda, did you have conversations with Mr. Wilson about Horizon's financial reporting? Darling, this is hardly the time for absurd accusations, Belinda deflected, her composure slipping slightly. Answer the question, Richard insisted, his tone hardening. Before Belinda could respond, the door opened again. A man in an immaculate suit entered without introduction, nodding to Sandra. James Crawford, FBI Financial Crimes Division, he announced, displaying credentials. I apologize for the interruption, but we've received information regarding potential securities fraud connected to this merger. I'm here as an observer at this stage, but I should advise everyone that this conversation may have legal implications. The atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically. What had been tense corporate negotiations suddenly carried the weight of potential criminal proceedings. Jeremy visibly paled. I think I should consult with personal counsel before continuing this discussion. That's your right, Crawford acknowledged. However, I should note that in cases of financial fraud, cooperation during initial stages is viewed favorably when considering charging decisions. Sandra turned to Alexander. As Horizon's legal counsel, I must advise that the company's interests and the personal interests of executives may not align in this situation. Any individuals concerned about personal liability should indeed seek separate representation. Alexander nodded grimly. I want to be absolutely clear. Horizon as a company is committed to full transparency and cooperation with any investigation. If financial improprieties occurred, those responsible will be held accountable. Richard Hammond had been silently reviewing the audit documentation. Now he looked up, his expression cold. Based on this evidence, and Mr. Wilson's partial admission, Vertex is invoking Section 27.3 of the merger agreement. We will pause all merger proceedings pending a complete forensic audit. Richard, Belinda began, touching his arm. He shrugged her off. Not now, Belinda. Turning back to the group, he continued. If these findings are confirmed by independent audit, Vertex will consider all available remedies under the agreement. I understand, Alexander replied formally. Horizon will fully cooperate with the audit process. As the meeting shifted to logistics of the investigation, I caught Rachel's eye. She gave me the slightest nod, acknowledging what we both knew. The truth was finally emerging, with consequences that would reach far beyond my personal situation. After establishing next steps, the meeting began to break up. As people filed out, Richard Hammond approached me. Miss Morrison, he said quietly, I owe you an apology. Your diligence and integrity likely saved Vertex from a disastrous acquisition. I was just doing my job, I replied. No, he countered. You were doing your job when everyone around you was pressuring you to look the other way. That's rare and valuable. Patricia's exact words from years ago. The symmetry wasn't lost on me. As the room cleared, Alexander asked me to stay behind. When we were alone, he sank heavily into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 57 years. I should have listened to you sooner, he admitted. Instead, I let the allure of this merger cloud my judgment. You didn't know the extent of it, I offered. I suspected something wasn't right, he countered. But I told myself it was just pre-merger jitters. I wanted the deal to happen, so I ignored the warning signs. He shook his head. That's not leadership. What happens now? An independent forensic audit. Probably criminal investigations. The merger is effectively dead. He managed a rueful smile, and ironically, Horizon will probably be stronger for it in the long run. But the short term is going to be extremely difficult. As I left his office, I felt strangely light despite the chaos unfolding around me. The truth had finally broken through, and whatever came next, I had remained true to my principles. Rachel was waiting for me by the elevators. You did it, she said simply. We did it, I corrected her. I couldn't have done this alone. What now? She asked as we descended to the lobby. I took a deep breath. Now we see what's left after the dust settles. The dust, as it turned out, would take months to settle, with reverberations that none of us could have fully anticipated. The 6 months following that fateful meeting were among the most challenging and transformative of my life. The FBI investigation expanded rapidly, uncovering a conspiracy more extensive than even I had suspected. Jeremy was arrested on multiple counts of securities fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering. 2 weeks later, Belinda Hammond was indicted as a co-conspirator. The evidence revealed that Belinda had orchestrated a scheme to sabotage Horizon from within, using Jeremy as her instrument. After the merger, they would have systematically dismantled Horizon's client relationships, directing the business to Lawson Technologies, where Belinda maintained significant ownership through family connections. Richard Hammond, investigators concluded, had been unaware of his wife's actions. The couple filed for divorce 3 weeks after her arrest. Vertex, under Richard's direction, ultimately proposed a new, significantly restructured merger agreement with Horizon, one that preserved the company's integrity and employee base. Through it all, I existed in a strange professional limbo. Some colleagues avoided me like the corporate equivalent of a leper, fearing association with the whistleblower. Others quietly expressed gratitude for preventing the predatory takeover that would have cost many their jobs. Alexander struggled to rebuild trust, both within the company and with stakeholders. To his credit, he publicly acknowledged the failure of oversight and implemented sweeping governance reforms. He also, to my surprise, asked me to lead those reforms as Horizon's new compliance director. You've proven that your integrity can't be bought or intimidated, he told me when offering the position. That's exactly what we need to rebuild. Taking the role meant stepping away from pure finance into a hybrid position overseeing both financial compliance and corporate governance. The learning curve was steep, but the opportunity to reshape Horizon's culture from within was too meaningful to pass up. When the restructured merger with Vertex was finally approved 4 months later, I led the compliance integration team. Richard Hammond, perhaps seeking personal redemption after his wife's betrayal, became an unexpected ally, championing transparency measures that exceeded regulatory requirements. On a personal level, the aftermath was complicated. There were nights I lay awake, questioning my decisions, wondering if I could have navigated the situation differently. The stress manifested physically in disrupted sleep, tension headaches, and a persistent knot of anxiety that took months to dissipate. My relationships suffered too. Friends outside work couldn't fully understand why I had risked my career for corporate ethics. Dating became complicated when potential partners Googled my name and found news stories about the Horizon fraud case. Yet amid these challenges, I found unexpected strength and clarity. The experience stripped away any illusions about corporate politics and human nature, but also revealed the power of standing firm in one's principles. Even when standing alone, Rachel and Kevin remained steadfast friends and colleagues throughout. When the newly merged company formed its executive leadership team, Rachel was appointed general counsel and Kevin became chief information security officer. Together, we formed the core of a new governance approach that prioritized ethical practices alongside profitability. I also reconnected with Patricia, who had retreated to a coastal home after her forced retirement. When I visited her, bringing news of the investigation's findings and the company's transformation, she listened with a mix of vindication and sadness. I suspected something wasn't right with Jeremy's numbers, she confessed. But I couldn't prove it, and when I raised concerns, the board suggested it was time for me to step aside for new perspectives. She squeezed my hand. You finished what I couldn't, Aliza. You should be proud. 6 months after the merger completed, I established a mentorship program for young professionals, particularly women, in corporate finance and compliance. Named in Patricia's honor, the program aimed to nurture not just technical skills but ethical leadership and the courage to speak truth to power. The healing process was gradual but real. Each time a mentee navigated an ethical dilemma successfully, each time our new compliance frameworks prevented potential issues, I felt the weight of those difficult months lighten slightly. On the anniversary of the day I'd stood my ground in the boardroom, Richard Hammond invited me to speak at a Vertex leadership conference on corporate ethics. Standing at the podium, looking out at faces that included both those who had supported me and those who had opposed me, I reflected on the journey. Integrity isn't abstract, I told the audience. It's a daily choice, made in moments large and small, often when no one is looking and the easier path beckons. It's choosing what's right over what's convenient, what's true over what's profitable in the moment. I paused, remembering the isolation and fear I'd felt during the investigation. The cost of integrity can be high in the short term. You may stand alone. You may be labeled difficult or not a team player. You may question yourself in the darkest hours of the night. Meeting the eyes of those watching, I continued. But the cost of abandoning integrity is ultimately far higher, both for organizations and for our own sense of self. Because once compromised, integrity is extraordinarily difficult to rebuild. In the years since exposing the fraud, I had come to understand that the experience, painful as it was, had revealed my own strength in ways nothing else could have. The moments that seem to be breaking us are often the ones making us stronger, forcing us to define what we truly stand for. As I continue my work at the merged company, I carry this understanding with me. Integrity isn't just a corporate value to be framed on a wall, but a personal commitment renewed each day through choices both large and small. Standing firm in that commitment, even when difficult, isn't just right. It's ultimately liberating, allowing us to move through the world without the burden of compromised principles. If my story resonates with you, I'd love to hear about a time when you chose integrity over convenience or stood up for what was right despite pressure to look the other way. Share your experience in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you appreciate stories about corporate justice and personal resilience. Remember that your voice matters, especially when speaking truth to power. Thank you for listening to my journey, and may you find the courage to follow your own moral compass, even when the path it points to seems the most difficult.